Hi, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Vasquez. I am an Azure technical specialist in the West region for state and local government. I basically help customers with cloud adoption of Azure. And today for our webcast, we're going to be covering Azure IaaS fundamentals. So IaaS standing for Infrastructure as a Service. This will give us an opportunity to take a look at different resources within Azure, specifically resource groups, networking, virtual machines. We're going to set some things up. We'll set up an IaaS public-facing web server and show you how to leverage network security groups to make that public-facing. But really, it just kind of gives you a chance to see, how fast and easy it is to set up resources in Azure. So with that said, let's go ahead and hop over to a Visio diagram here. Okay, so this is what we're going to be building today. Now, if you take a look, we'll start from the outside in. So we're going to first build a resource group within Azure. So a resource group is a logical container for your Azure resources. Think of it like an organizational unit or an OU, an Active Directory. So you can basically put different things in there like virtual machines, storage accounts, any resources in Azure can be managed within a resource group. And then after we build our resource group, we're going to go ahead and build our Azure Virtual Network, or our VNet for short. You can see the dotted line there. It'll be using private IP addressing. And then we're going to carve up that VNet into two separate subnets. So you can see the blue boxes there in the middle. We're going to create a DMZ subnet where we're going to put our virtual machine, which will be our web server. And then we're also going to create a backend subnet for our internal app servers and maybe like a database tier if you're going to install something like SQL. And then we're going to lock those subnets down with what we call network security groups, or NSGs for short. The easiest way to think about these NSGs is think of them as a firewall. That's pretty much what they are. And again, it's all going to be using private IP addressing. So none of this will be publicly accessible until we provide that access. So it's all locked down. It's like your own LAN, your own local area network up in the cloud. And again, we're not going to be deploying any physical hardware. All of this stuff is using like software-defined networking and virtual resources within Azure, all up in the public cloud. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and start building. Let me go ahead and switch my screen here over to my browser. And that will paint here in 1 second, or more than one, maybe a few seconds. Okay, there now you can see the Azure portal. So here, if you just browse to portal.azure.com and log in with your credentials, this is what you'd see. So this dashboard is fully customizable. You can set up your resources here to access them quickly. But for our demo here today, we're going to go ahead and first start with building a resource group, that logical container. So to create any resource in Azure, you can use things like PowerShell or the Azure CLI. Today, we're going to be using the portal, which is more of a GUI interface. We'll go ahead and click on New here so we can access the Azure Marketplace. And here, you can search for all kinds of good stuff that's available within Azure. So the first thing we're going to create is our resource group. So just type in resource group. And there it is, resource group. So let's click that. Anytime you create a resource within Azure, you'll get a little description up here that you can read through with a lot of good information. And then also links to documentation if you need that. So let's go ahead and click create. Okay, so something that's really important when it comes to Azure is treat it like your own data center that you're building. So follow a proper naming convention, just like you do with like your servers on-prem or your equipment on-prem, you have some kind of naming convention. So it's really easy to kind of overlook those kinds of things when creating your resources in Azure, just because it's so easy and so fast, right? But yeah, think of it as building a data center from the ground up. So for this resource group, we're going to follow the naming convention of first specifying the location. So South Central US is where we're going to deploy our resources. That's the location of our data center. So let's say SCUS, and then RG, because it's a resource group, and the workload. So today, this is going to be like a DMZ demo in IaaS, right? So we'll just say DMZ demo. So that will be our resource group. You select your subscription, your Azure subscription, and your resource group location. So let's deploy it in South Central US. Let's click create. You can see here that, oh, wow, that's fast. It already created our resource group. So let's go ahead and go to our resource group we created. And here is our logical container here, our resource group. Nothing in it yet. So the next thing we're going to want to build is our virtual network. So if you're standing up a brand new data center, right, you can't really start building anything or standing things up without a network. So let's go ahead and create our virtual network first. So let's go to the marketplace again by clicking new. Let's type in virtual network. Okay, so there's our virtual network. Let's click create down here. And our virtual network is deploying. Actually, first we got to provide some values. So following the same naming convention, SCUS, VNets, DMZ demo, 01. So let's add an 01 for the instance, just in case we decide to build another virtual network in the future for this service. Okay, so this is important. The address space here, it's using private IP addressing, and you specify the address space or the range with the CIDR here. So here, by default, it put 24, which is 256 addresses. If you wanted to increase that, you could put a CIDR of 23, and boom, you get 512 addresses, right? So you just adjust it for however big you want your address space to be. So let's just put it back to 24. I don't need a lot here. I'm standing up just one VM today. So /24, 256 addresses. Let's go ahead and select the resource group that we created a few minutes ago. Let's go down here. There's the resource group. So this virtual network will be deployed within this resource group here. And we want this virtual network to be deployed in our South Central US data center. So that's our physical data center down in the South Central portion of the United States. And here we can create our default subnet. So we can carve up this virtual network into subnets. So our main subnet we're going to be using today is going to be our DMZ. It'll have our web server that will be public facing. So let's go ahead and name this following the same naming convention as SCUS. And we'll say subnet DMZ demo 01. Let's see. Yep, DMZ demo, perfect. Now, if we were to leave the address range here with /24, it would take all the IP addresses for the address space that we created. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to create a backend subnet which will remain completely internal or internal facing. So let's change this to /25, and we're just going to use 128 addresses for this specific subnet within the virtual network that we're creating. Let's go ahead and click create. That will start deploying the virtual network along with the initial subnet, that DMZ subnet. Now, you hear me talk about that subnet being public facing. It's not public facing yet. It's completely internal until we start opening up ports and providing public IP addresses, which we don't have quite yet. So right now, everything we built is internal only. Okay, so that virtual network was just created. No need to deploy any routers, any physical switches, any patch cables, none of that. This is all software-defined networking, and we deployed an entire network in just minutes. So pretty awesome stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at our virtual network. Let's go to the resource here. All right, you can see here, this is the virtual network that we just created. And if you go to address space here, so it has that 24/24 address space, the 256 addresses. If you go to connected devices, nothing connected to it yet. So it's just a standalone network with no devices yet. Now, if we go to subnets, you see that subnet is there that we created with that initial address range of /25. Let's create another subnet for the backend. And here we'll name this SCUS subnet, and this will be backend DMZ demo 01. And let's go ahead and grab the rest of those available addresses. So we'll do a /25. We'll be covering network security groups a little later. We're not going to set up route tables today in this demo. We'll click OK. And there you go. Now you have your other subnet. So now all the addresses are being used on our, or all the space has been taken by these two subnets within the virtual network that we created. Now let's go ahead and set up a network security group, aka firewall. Now what that's going to do is allow certain kinds of traffic through to the subnet, and also block traffic depending on what we allow through it. This is what will allow folks to access our IaaS server through port 80 from the public internet, as well as allow RDP access, port 3389, so that we can remote desktop into that VM using its public IP addresses. So let's go ahead and create a network security group and attach it to our DMZ demo. Okay, so let's type in network security group. Great, there's our network security group. See the icon's a shield, a lot like the Windows firewall icon. All right, let's go ahead and name this NSG. So the region, SCUS, is going to be NSG DMZ demo 01. Just in case we need to create another network security group later, we'll put that instance of 01. Let's put it in the resource group that we created earlier. South Central US is our data center region. Let's click create. Looks like it's deploying. And so this network security group is a service, or a product that's available within Azure. It's native to Azure. But we also have third-party firewalls that you can get from the Azure Marketplace as well. If you want to use something like an F5 appliance or a Barracuda, they have network virtual appliances that you can get in the Azure Marketplace. So if you need something a little more heavy duty with a lot more than just basic firewall functionality, those are available. And I believe you can bring your own license, and you can work with your vendors like F5 and Barracuda to make sure you have the licensing for that. But to get access to those, you would just go to your marketplace and type in, like F5. And these are the virtual network appliances you can use, within your environment here in Azure. Okay, so going back to the network security group, it looks like it was deployed, it was created. So let's take a look. Let's look at our resource group first, because the firewall should have deployed into our resource group. So let's go to our resource group here. And we have it here, the DMZ demo resource group. All right, so you can see the virtual network was created here within the resource group from earlier. And then here is the firewall or the NSG that we created. Let's go to this firewall here. And we want to allow port 80 in so that folks can browse to our web server that we're going to be standing up here in a minute. So inbound security rules right here. You click on add. And it's a lot easier if you select the basic option for setting this up, because then you can just select the service and we want to allow web traffic. So HTTP, which is right here, port 80, you click on HTTP, it autofills a port for you. So you don't need to worry about knowing which port is specific to which service. It automatically populates. You can set priorities over your rules. The lower the priority number, the like the more it'll be prioritized. And it's good to have gaps in between your rules. So like the next the next rule you create, you'll want to put a priority of maybe 200, just in case you need to have other rules prioritized in between those two. The name, let's go ahead and name this HTTP allow because we're going to be allowing HTTP traffic. And we'll say OK. And now this rule is being created. So the only kind of traffic that will be allowed through this firewall is port 80. Everything else will be blocked, but it's not attached to any subnet or any NIC yet on a VM. So it's kind of useless until we actually attach it to something. There you can see port 80 is set up for this rule. Everything else is blocked. Let's go ahead and attach it to our DMZ subnet. So let's go back to our virtual network. Here you can go to virtual networks here. And here is the one that we created, the SCUS VNet DMZ demo 01. That name is super long, I know, but naming conventions, right? Let's go ahead and click on that. Let's go to the subnet, which we want to attach that network security group to, this DMZ demo 01. Okay, here for DMZ demo 01 for this subnet, click on network security group, and you can see the NSG that we just created. So there it is. Let's click that. And now let's save. Great. Now that network security group is applied to that subnet, and we're going to go ahead and test it out after we get our VM created on that subnet. So since that's been applied and we have our networking set up, we can go ahead and create our virtual machine. So the process for creating virtual machines is super easy. Just like everything else, we go to our fabulous Azure Marketplace. So click on New, and we're going to be using IaaS. So let's go ahead and do a Windows Server 2016 box. So you can search for VMs by their OS. So if you wanted to stand up a Linux box, you could say Ubuntu. And here you can see all the Ubuntu images for VMs that you have available. But we're going to do Windows Server 2016. We have Windows Server 2012 images available as well if you wanted to use maybe an older OS. If you wanted to get a SQL VM, you can even find SQL images within the marketplace. So let's go ahead and choose Windows Server 2016 Data Center. Let's click Create. Now let's add the basic settings. So let's name it following our naming convention, SCUS VM, because it's a virtual machine, DMZ demo, and then so web server, so web 01. Just in case we wanted to add other web servers as part of a availability set or a web farm, then we would, add other instances. For the VM disk type, you can choose between solid state drives, SSD, if you needed faster storage for workloads like SQL or something that required faster disks. But for this purpose, since it's just a demo and it's just a web server, it's going to be doing very basic stuff. We'll select standard HDD, so standard hard drive disks. And let's see here. Username, this will be your local admin so that you can log into your server remotely. So local admin, a password, there's password complexity rules. So let me type in my password. Okay, select your subscription. Let's put the virtual machine in the resource group we created. Oh, it doesn't like the name. Let's see why. Oh, it's too long. Okay, so let's simplify the name of this server here, or this VM. I'll just call it VM Web 01. So it took that. Great. And it's going to be in the South Central US data center region, like everything else we've created today. Oh yeah, if you already own server licenses as part of an enterprise agreement, you can get discounted pricing on your Azure virtual machines. So if you already had a license, you could select yes, and it would deduct the cost of the OS license. If you select no, the cost of the OS license is included as part of the compute costs in Azure. So if you do have licenses you already own and you want to use them, make sure you select yes here. Let's say okay. Now for your virtual machines, here are the VM sizes that you can choose from. These are the ones that are recommended, but let's go ahead and do view all here. So you can see all the different VM sizes. You can see we have all kinds of different sizes. The D series, the ones that start with D, are our production level VMs. So these are the ones that can have like premium storage attached to them. If you needed like SSD drives, they have better processors, better specs. If you were just doing some stuff in test dev or had maybe workloads that weren't very resource intensive, that don't require like high specs or anything like that, you can go down to like the A series, which if we scroll down here, you can see we have A series VMs here, which are considered our basic series. So the processors aren't as good as the D series, but for like dev test scenarios, this stuff should work just fine. You can look at the information here. It shows you how many data drives you can attach to each VM, the max IOPS for the storage, the amount of memory, as well as CPU cores. So let's go ahead and go back up here. We're just going to go ahead and select a standard D series up here. There are other VM sizes, other VM size families for specific workloads that require maybe more memory or that are more processor intensive. So, there's all kinds. Just reach out to your Microsoft representatives and they can help you size the right kind of virtual machines for the service that you're planning to deploy within Azure. So we've selected a DS1v2. And optional features. So if you wanted to make this server part of an availability set, like if you were setting up a website with 2 web servers and you wanted them to be redundant, then, or have some kind of a high availability, you could select availability set here and add it as part of an availability set. But here, we're just going to create a single VM since this is just a demo. For storage type, we selected the HDD, slower storage. Managed disks. So this is something that recently became available within the last year. In the past, you'd have to create a storage account for your VM disk. And what would happen is that storage account would become a single point of failure. So if that storage account had an issue or the hardware that it ran on had an issue, then your VM would go down because you'd lose your storage account. But with managed disks, what they do is they take your data and your disk here, your virtual disk, and they stripe it across different pieces of hardware so that if you were to have hardware failure or some kind of, something going down which would impact, your storage, at least you'd still have resiliency built in because of the striping to other hardware. So we always recommend using managed disks. There's an added cost, but it does add a lot of resiliency to your VM. The virtual network. So let's put it on the virtual network that we created today, the DMZ demo 01. Now we want to put this on the DMZ subnet because this is the one that will be public facing. So you see here, DMZ demo 01 and backend. So let's select the DMZ subnet. Now we do want a public IP address. This is how we're going to browse to our virtual machine or our IaaS website here. Let's just select static. Let's say OK. So we're adding a public IP address. Now the network security group. So you can apply a network security group or a firewall either at the subnet level or at the NIC level of a VM. So we've created the network security group and already attached it to the subnet, the DMZ subnet. So we don't need to set up the NSG for the VM or at the VM level. And if you wanted to, you could set one up for added security, but since we're just doing a demo here, we don't need to add an NSG attached to the NIC of this VM since we're using the one attached to the firewall. Then here's some other options here. You can add extensions. You can enable auto shutdown. That will save you costs because the VM wouldn't be running 24/7. Boot diagnostics, you can enable that. You can enable guest OS diagnostics, and then the storage account for diagnostics. The diagnostics info can add up. It can come out to a lot of storage. So we create a separate storage account to store all your diagnostics info. Let's say okay. Now it's running its validation, it's loading the info, and here you can get a snapshot of all the settings that you set for your VM. You can read the terms of use for the virtual machine, see the VM size, you see how much it'll cost per hour. Good information here. And once you're ready, click purchase and it'll start deploying the virtual machine. The deployment is going. That's going to take roughly around 10 minutes. So I'll go ahead and pause the recording and then we'll pick it back up once it's done deploying. Okay, it looks like the deployment succeeded. The virtual machine was created. It took about 10 minutes for it to spin up. Now, here is the virtual machine. You can see the settings here for the VM. So everything from what resource group it's in, what data center region, what OS, its public IP address, its size, all that good stuff. You also get monitoring info here. Now, remember, this is an Azure commercial. You might not get some of these features in Azure Government. And if you are an Azure Government customer, work with your Microsoft resource and they should be able to help you out if there are some features missing. But okay, so let's go ahead and try and access our virtual machine here. So let's click connect. It's going to try and open an RDP window. Let me bring that here. And there's the RDP session. Let's click connect. You can see here it's trying to connect. Initiating remote connection. Oh, it looks like it's hanging. What's wrong? It's broken. I failed. Oh no. No, just kidding. There is something we forgot to set, right? Can anyone think of the setting that we forgot? Okay, well, I'll give you a clue. Actually, I'll just tell you. The network security group, the firewall, it's blocking the RDP access. Why? Because we only specified port 80 as a port that's allowed to get through that subnet. And this virtual machine is on that subnet. So all the traffic is being blocked. So let's go ahead and go back to our network security group. So let's go ahead and let's go to our resource group that we created. Right here, the DMZ demo resource group. Here is the shield, the firewall, the NSG, and there's port 80. Let's add another inbound rule for port 3389 for RDP access. Let's click add. Let's change it to basic here, just because I don't like things complicated. Service, let's select RDP. There it is, RDP, auto-populated 3389. Let's set the priority to 200. Let's call it RDP allow for the name of the rule. Let's say okay. And it does take a minute for the rule to apply, so it might not allow us to access it right away. So it says done. Let's give it another shot here. Let's go back to the virtual machine. Hopefully this hasn't made me a liar, and hopefully it doesn't fail again, but let's try it. Let's go to the VM we created. Here it is, Web01, SCUS VM Web01. There's our virtual machine. Let's try and connect. RDP attempt number 2. Let's say okay. There's the RDP window. Configuring remote session. You see it connecting. It's asking for my credentials. So local admin. Remember, this is the local admin credentials that we specified when setting up the VM. Let's say okay. Here's RDP window. Sorry, I keep having to drag it over. I have 2 screens and it keeps defaulting to the other. Let's say yes. It's working. Okay, let's drag it over here. And here is the virtual machine that we created. Voila, there it is. Okay, so now it's setting up the virtual machine for its first time use. It's the first time we've logged into it. Now think about how long it would take you to have to provision hardware or purchase hardware, have it shipped, have the server shipped to you, having to rack and stack it, um, patch it into the network, install the OS, apply patches, and yada, yada, yada. That would take weeks, right? Here, you set up a virtual machine, a server, in just a few minutes. Now, I know most folks use virtualization. You probably have VMware, or, if you're a Microsoft loyalist, have Hyper-V. And yeah, you can spin up your VMs there also, but, a lot of folks are starting to run out of capacity in their virtualization hosts. And also the costs can add up pretty quickly for like a VMware environment. So here in Azure, you can have your VM super fast and it's cost effective and you only pay for what you use. So if you wanted to shut down your VM in the middle of the night to save on costs or on the weekend, you can do that. So we'll go ahead and let our virtual machine here, our Windows OS here, start up. And it's going to take a little bit to load everything just because it's its first time. See here, the IP address, the port. Has a start button. So it's not 2012 or Windows 8. See if you run a command prompt, run ipconfig, that's its public IP address. Sorry, the private IP address, 10.2.0.4, which is on that virtual network that we created a little while ago. So it's plugged in. Here's a server manager. Let's go ahead and turn this into an IaaS server. Let's add the IaaS server role here. Let's click next, next, next. All right, web server. Add features. Add all these web server roles. Click next, and let's install IaaS. Okay, looks like the installation succeeded. Let's go ahead and hit close. Let's close this up. All right, let's minimize our virtual machine here. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and take note of the public IP address. So it's 52.171.62.114. We're going to try and browse to it now to see if IaaS is working. So let's minimize the VM. Let's copy the IP address. Now this is my browser here on my home network here in my office. So this is external. Let's go ahead and paste in the IP address. And there you go. This is the web server that we created in just, in less than 30 minutes, I think. Definitely less than an hour. So in less than an hour, we stood up an entire network. We created subnets, we created firewalls, we stood up a virtual machine, installed IaaS, and we have a fully functional web server that's public facing. If you try to type this into your browser at this very moment, you'd get the same thing. But probably by the time this is published, it'll be taken down. So sorry about that. But let's go ahead and show you how network security groups work. You saw it earlier with RDP, but just to prove that I'm not a liar, let's go back to our network security group here. Where's resource groups? Let's go to our resource group. And within that, we will find our network security group. There it is, our shield, our protector, firewall friend. Okay, so HTTP allow. Let's go ahead and remove this rule. Let's go inbound security rules, port 80, and let's delete. Say yes. Check the status on this bell here. It's deleting the security rule and it has been applied. Now that does take a sec to kick in. So I'm not gonna try and browse to it right away. Also, I'm gonna use a different browser just in case there's like any caching or anything that took place. So let's open a new Chrome window. Let's type in the public IP address, paste. Hopefully that setting is kicked in to the network security group. If it hasn't, then we'll get the IaaS site again. But if it is working, and if it's already applied, then it should be blocking this traffic. So it's still up. It made me a liar. Oh no. Okay, let's close this. Let's try Internet Explorer. I think I tried to do that too fast. It's replicating the settings. Okay, so there's the public IP address. And you see it's waiting, it's thinking. Oh, can't get to it. It's blocked, right? Let's try Chrome again. See if we get the same thing here. Hopefully it's not cached. It's cached. Let's see if I have Firefox installed. I don't. But as you can see here, it's being blocked. Let's try an in-private session with Edge. Paste. And there, it's blocked. So we can no longer get to that IaaS website through the public IP because the NSG is blocking it since we removed the allow rule for port 80. Now let's reallow it. Let's just minimize those windows and try and use the same browser session. So let's re-add the rule. Let's go to basic. Let's do HTTP. Where is it here? There it is, kind of hidden. HTTP, port 80, name it HTTP, allow. Let's say okay. Just creating the security rule. If you wanted more information about it, you can just click on it. And it's been created. So now it should allow that traffic. But I've learned my lesson. I've learned to give it at least a minute before I try to access it. I wonder if it's been long enough now. I'm scared. Okay, so let's try this public IP address that it couldn't get to a second ago. But we've opened up port 80. Boom, it works. So there's the power of the network security group. I mean, that's how easy it is to get a website up and running. We created that backend subnet earlier. If you wanted to, you could add a network security group there and only allow maybe SQL traffic to get through so that you can get from the web server to like a database if you needed to. So in a nutshell, we covered IaaS fundamentals. You saw the basics of creating things in Azure like resource groups, virtual machines, networking. And so I recommend that you go out there, you sign up for your MSDN and or a free trial and start kicking the tires, start playing around with Azure. It's really powerful at your fingertips with just a couple clicks. It's amazing what you can build. So with that said, if you have any questions, feel free to comment or you can reach out to me directly or reach out to your Microsoft representatives and they'll be more than willing to help out. Hopefully you enjoyed the session and thank you for watching. Take care.